It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when 9-year-old Emily Parker waved goodbye to her mom at the front door and set off for school just 3 blocks away. She had done it 100 times before. Same pink backpack, same green and yellow striped shirt, same cheerful smile lighting up her freckled face. The weather was calm, the sun just rising, and the streets were still sleepy with early commuters and neighbors tending to their lawns. Nothing about that day seemed different. But Emily never made it to school. And what began as a simple missing persons report quickly unraveled into a mystery that would leave a community haunted for nearly a decade. Emily was the kind of kid everyone noticed. Bright, bubbly, and kind to everyone. Teachers adored her. Her classmates followed her lead, and neighbors often mentioned how polite and curious she was. So when she didn't show up for class that morning, it didn't take long for alarms to go off. The school called her home. Her mom called the police, and by that afternoon, the whole neighborhood had mobilized to search for her. Flyers were posted, doorbells were rung, wooded areas were combed through, and every possible street corner was questioned. But there were no signs of Emily. No footprints, no eyewitnesses, no camera footage. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Investigators followed every lead, chased every theory, and interviewed anyone who might have known something. From family members to strangers, no stone was left unturned. Her parents were questioned thoroughly. Even friends and teachers were. Asked again and again, did Emily seem upset? Was she planning to run away? But everyone agreed. Emily was happy, grounded, and excited for her upcoming birthday party. There was nothing to suggest she would have left on her own. The case went cold, and heartbreak settled over the small town like a cloud that refused to lift. 8 long years passed. The Parker family moved out of the home where they had once raised Emily. The memories were too much: the untouched bedroom, the kitchen where her laughter used to echo, the quiet hallway that felt colder without her presence. They moved just 2 towns over, trying to start fresh, though their lives never truly felt whole again. The house was sold, rented out, and eventually passed through a few owners over the years. No one who lived there ever imagined the secret that lay just beneath their feet. Then one day, a call came in to a local electric company. The new homeowners were renovating, installing new wiring, and converting part of the basement. 2 electricians were assigned the job. And as they began their inspection in the crawlspace under the house, they noticed something strange. A makeshift area barely tall enough to crouch in had been sectioned off with old boards and worn-out blankets. A faded red mattress sat on the dirt floor, surrounded by small bowls, torn clothing, and a dusty pink backpack. The items were old, but chillingly preserved. On the concrete wall behind a wooden post, a child's drawing of Hello Kitty had been taped up, its corners curled with age. What unsettled them the most wasn't the items themselves, but the heavy chain attached to one of the wooden beams. It was bolted tightly to the structure, and at the other end, a frayed red strap that looked like it had been broken or cut. The silence in that crawlspace felt suffocating. One of the workers, unsure of what they were even looking at, snapped a few photos and called the police. The scene quickly turned into a crime investigation. Forensics teams arrived, cataloging every inch of the area. The items were carefully bagged, and the space was secured. It wasn't long before the pink backpack was confirmed to be the same one Emily Parker had been wearing the day she vanished. Her clothes were also identified, still bearing faint traces of the detergent her mom used, and a small patch sewn into the overalls that read, "Love Mom." The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. After all these years, Emily had been just beneath that house. But where was she now, and who had put her there? The news spread fast. TV stations picked up the story, and people from all over the country tuned in. How could a child go missing just minutes from her home and end up hidden in such a disturbingly close place, who had access to the house at that time, and more importantly, was Emily still alive? Investigators reopened the case immediately. Former tenants were contacted, background checks were done, and suspicions began to fall on people who had long since moved on, or thought no one would ever look back. One of the strangest elements was how carefully hidden the area was. From above, nothing seemed unusual. The floor was sturdy, the crawlspace. Access hidden behind a false panel in the utility room. The original police searches had never extended to the area below the floorboards, mainly because, at the time, the crawlspace wasn't listed in the property layout. Whoever created the hidden space knew what they were doing. They planned it. They maintained it, and they made sure it was invisible. The Parker family was contacted immediately after the discovery. Emily's mother, who had spent years holding on to hope, was crushed and overwhelmed. She described the moment she saw her daughter's backpack on the news. It was like being hit by a tidal wave of emotion. Grief, hope, fear, anger all at once. She agreed to work with investigators, answering old questions and revisiting painful memories, hoping this time they might finally uncover the truth. As more evidence was collected, the pieces slowly began to form a clearer picture, but one major piece was still missing: Emily herself. There was no trace of her body, no bones, no hair, nothing biological to suggest whether she had ever left that crawlspace alive. Some detectives believe she was kept there for a time and later moved. Others suggest she may have escaped. A few hold out hope she's still alive, living somewhere under a different name. Unable to remember or reach out, the mystery surrounding Emily's disappearance is far from over. Each clue raises new questions. How long was she kept there? Was anyone else involved? And how did no one ever hear or see anything all those years? The crawlspace beneath that quiet little house holds more than old dirt and wood beams. Holds secrets, darkness, and possibly the key to what really happened to Emily Parker. And just when investigators think they've reached the end of the road, one final discovery shifts everything again. To be continued. When investigators went back through the property records and rental history, they realized something that had been overlooked years ago. Just before Emily disappeared, the house had been rented out to a man named Douglas Haynes. At the time, he was a quiet, middle-aged electrician with no serious criminal record. He lived alone and mostly kept to himself. According to neighbors, he was polite, but rarely spoke unless spoken to, and often worked odd hours. No one paid him much attention back then. He only stayed in the house for about 6 months before moving out suddenly, breaking his lease without notice. The landlord remembered him only vaguely, saying he left behind a bit of a mess, but nothing alarming enough to raise suspicion. But now, with the discovery beneath the house, his name was back on everyone's radar. Detectives started digging into Douglas Haynes' past. What they found unsettled them even more. Though he'd never been arrested for anything violent, his name had come up in several old police reports involving complaints from tenants in other rental properties. In 2 separate cases, landlords had mentioned locked rooms or strange modifications made to crawl spaces and basements. Nothing was ever proven, and no formal charges were filed. Still, it painted a troubling picture of someone who seemed to enjoy creating hidden places where no one would look, and no one could hear. Around the same time Emily vanished, Douglas had also changed jobs and moved 3 towns over. Investigators tracked him down, now living in a small trailer near the state line. He had grown a beard, aged visibly, and when questioned, he seemed nervous but cooperative. He admitted to living in the house, but claimed to remember nothing unusual. He denied ever seeing or knowing Emily. When asked about the crawlspace, he acted confused. "I didn't even know that part of the house existed," he said. Detectives weren't convinced. His tone was off, like he was struggling to keep his story straight. Still, without physical evidence linking him directly to the space or to Emily. There wasn't enough to make an arrest. Meanwhile, forensic teams continued combing through every item found in the crawlspace. The mattress had a few long, faded stains that tested inconclusive for DNA. The bowls were dusty, with no clear prints. The Hello Kitty drawing had been drawn on paper from a school notebook. And while it matched Emily's style, the markings were too faint for confirmation. It was as if someone had deliberately erased traces of her, wiping away the truth just enough to stay hidden. But there was one clue they hadn't shared with the public yet. Tucked beneath the mattress, pressed tightly into the floorboards, they found a small scrap of cloth. It was pink, part of a sleeve, and had the letters M written in faded marker. Emily's mom confirmed she had written her daughter's name on all her clothes before the school year started. That cloth may have once been part of a pajama top. It wasn't much, but it was enough to suggest Emily had been there live, at least for a time. The implications were horrifying. That space wasn't just a hideout, it was a prison. Someone had kept her there, fed her, clothed her, maybe even talked to her. But what happened after that remained a painful, unanswered question. As the story spread, the Parker family began receiving calls and messages from people all over the country. A few claimed to have seen a girl who resembled Emily in different towns. Others offered theories, some plausible, others completely bizarre. One woman, a retired nurse, said a teenage girl once came into her clinic years ago, barefoot and frightened, but left before giving her name. The nurse couldn't remember the exact year, but it was close to the time Emily would have turned 13. That tip was being investigated, but again, there was no way to prove it was her. Emily's younger brother, Jake, who was only a toddler when she vanished, was now a teenager. He had no real memories of his sister, only stories told to him by their parents. But this discovery stirred something deep in him, a quiet determination to find out the truth. He began going through old family photos, journals, even Emily's old school books. He said he was trying to remember her, trying to feel connected. It was heartbreaking to watch, but his quiet strength gave the family a new reason to keep pushing forward. Back at the crime lab, something else was unfolding. An analyst discovered faint residue in one of the bowls, a combination of oatmeal and a crushed supplement used to promote sleep. The supplement wasn't available over the counter, which suggested someone had deliberately mixed it in. This changed everything. It meant Emily may have been drugged while kept in that space. It also raised questions about how often she was fed and how aware she was of her surroundings. The tension in the investigation was growing. Detectives began re-interviewing anyone who had lived in the neighborhood. Back in those early years, one elderly woman who had lived across the street and often sat on her porch in the mornings remembered something odd. She recalled seeing a man, possibly Douglas, carrying groceries into the house during a time it was supposedly vacant. She assumed he was just the new tenant, but now wondered if those groceries were meant for someone else. It wasn't enough to confirm anything, but it added another crack to Douglas's already shaky alibi. Despite the growing pile of circumstantial evidence, the most important question still remained: where was Emily? If she had died in that crawlspace, why wasn't there a body? If she had escaped, how? And why hadn't she come forward? A few investigators had their own theory. They believed Emily may have been held there temporarily and then moved somewhere else, either willingly or by force. They began checking missing persons reports from neighboring towns around the time she vanished, looking for cases of girls with no name or identity. Several leads emerged, but none resulted in a match. It was like chasing a ghost. She had been so close, and yet the truth remained just out of reach. The Parker family was once again thrust into the public eye, reliving the worst chapter of their lives. But this time, they had a shred of hope. Emily's mom spoke quietly. In interviews, often choking back tears, saying she believed her daughter was still out there. Not because of blind faith, but because a mother's instinct told her the story wasn't over. "I don't think she's gone," she said once. "I think someone made her believe she had to stay hidden. Or maybe she's waiting for the right moment." As the days passed, authorities continued to examine every thread of evidence. But deep down, they knew the truth might not come from a lab or a report. It might come from someone out there, someone who saw something new. Something or had been carrying a secret for years. And until that person came forward, the question would remain locked in the shadows of that crawlspace. The past had clawed its way to the surface. But the story of what really happened to Emily Parker was still far from over. As the investigation deepened, a sense of unease settled over the town once again. What had started as a local tragedy was now drawing attention from all over. Reporters set up outside the old Parker home, now a crime scene sealed off with yellow tape. People who had once moved on from the case were now back in the loop, wondering how they had missed the signs, and if they had been living beside something terrible without even knowing it. But as the focus narrowed on Douglas Haynes, new angles started to emerge, ones that complicated the story even more. A woman named Laura Gentry came forward after seeing the news. She said she had briefly dated Douglas nearly 9 years ago, just after he moved out of the house where Emily disappeared. According to her, Douglas was kind at first, quiet, maybe a little awkward, but there was something about him that never sat right. He didn't talk about his past, avoided any mention of family, and seemed constantly nervous when it came to noise or unexpected visitors. One time, while staying at his small rental outside of town, she noticed a locked storage room in the basement. When she asked about it, he became defensive and changed the subject. She never saw inside. Her account added more weight to the suspicion, but still no physical evidence. Investigators searched the old rental property she mentioned, now abandoned, and found it empty. No trace of anything unusual, but it painted a clearer picture. If Douglas had kept Emily hidden once, was it possible he had done it again somewhere else? Had he moved her from the crawlspace and continued to hide her year after year? Another layer of complexity came from the town itself. Over the years, some residents had quietly speculated that there was more to Emily's disappearance than met the eye. A retired officer who had worked the original case anonymously shared his frustrations. Back then, he said, there were leads that never got followed, phone tips that were dismissed too quickly. Some suggested the original investigators didn't take the early warnings seriously enough because Emily came from a good family in a safe neighborhood. The assumption was that she had run away, not been taken. That assumption cost them time that could have made all the difference. Meanwhile, Emily's school records were re-examined. A counselor's note from the year she vanished revealed something small but important. 2 weeks before she went missing, Emily had told the counselor she felt like someone was watching her on her way to school. The note didn't go into details. A sentence scribbled in the margin, but it raised new questions. Why wasn't that flagged back then? Who was watching her? And was it connected to the person who eventually took her? Investigators began cross-referencing her route to school with known residents at the time. They found that Douglas's work truck had often been parked near one of the side streets she walked down. Maybe coincidence? Maybe not. As they pushed forward, another subplot began to emerge, one that no one had expected. A different family, living just 2 blocks from where Emily had gone missing, reported something strange to the police. Their daughter, now 20, claimed she remembered seeing a girl in a basement window once, years ago. She was only 11 at the time and didn't understand what she was looking at. But she remembered it clearly. A girl with red hair sitting near a wall, looking out like she wasn't supposed to be there. She had never told anyone, thinking it was just her imagination. But after the recent discovery, the memory came. Rushing back, investigators took her seriously. They checked the house she described. It had been rented to various people over the years, including a man who turned out to have once worked alongside Douglas. The connection sent chills through court. The connection sent chills through everyone involved. Could it be that Emily wasn't just hidden in one place? Could she have been moved between locations with the help of others? This opened up a darker possibility that more than one person had been involved. That there had been a network, or at the very least, a silent accomplice. Detectives now had to look not just at Douglas, but at anyone he worked with, anyone he rented from, and anyone who might have known what was happening and stayed quiet. The list was long, and the deeper they went, the more disturbing the connections became. Emily's brother Jake, meanwhile, became increasingly involved. Though young, he was focused and sharp. He started reading old case files with permission from investigators, sometimes spotting small things others missed. In one newspaper clipping from 2017, he noticed something: a background detail in a photo showing a familiar pink backpack hanging in a second-hand shop window. He brought it to the team, who tracked the photos to a now-closed thrift store. The trail had gone cold, but it showed how far and wide Emily's belongings may have traveled. It also hinted that someone had tried to get rid of evidence by blending it into everyday places with each new clue. The tension only grew. The Parker family found themselves walking a tightrope between hope and heartbreak. Emily's mother kept journals of her thoughts, her theories, her dreams, some filled with guilt, others with pure determination. Her father, quieter, but less committed, rarely spoke to the press, but kept in close contact with the investigation team, pressing them for updates. Their lives had become a blur of waiting rooms, interviews, and quiet moments staring out the window, wondering if their daughter was still out there, watching the same sky. And still, the biggest question hung over everything like a shadow. If Emily had been kept alive all this time, why hadn't she come forward? Was it fear? Confusion? Was she even aware of who she really was anymore? Psychologists consulted on the case explained that long-term confinement, especially for children, can cause memory distortion, trauma-induced silence, and even identity confusion. If Emily had been taken at such a young age and told lies for years about her family, her past, even her name, she might genuinely believe those lies were real. The thought was terrifying, but it also gave hope. Maybe she hadn't stayed away by choice. Maybe she needed someone to reach her before she could find her way home. As investigators continued connecting pieces from the past and following the threads that kept unraveling, one thing became clear: this was not an isolated event. Someone had planned Emily's disappearance. Someone had kept it hidden. And someone, even now, might still be trying to cover their tracks. The search wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Because in a quiet town where secrets were buried deep, sometimes the answers don't lie in what's seen, but in what everyone failed to look at. The town was no longer just watching from a distance, it was holding its breath. The once quiet neighborhoods, the corner stores, the familiar sidewalks where Emily had walked years ago, all felt different now. Rumors spread like wildfire, each more chilling than the last. People whispered about what really might have been going on, about how someone could hide a child so close to home for so long. Every lead, every unanswered question added weight to the air. Like something terrible was just on the edge of being uncovered. The detectives, now working around the clock, had narrowed their focus on a cluster of addresses, properties either rented or visited frequently by Douglas and his known associates in the years after Emily vanished. One particular home stood out. It belonged to a man named Curtis Bloom, a former coworker of Douglas who had also done side jobs in construction and electrical work. He had gone mostly unnoticed in the early investigation because he had no direct link to the Parker family. But a recent background search showed that Curtis had owned a van matching the one seen briefly on a blurry neighborhood camera the morning Emily disappeared. At the time, no one could identify it clearly enough to act on it. But now, with this new connection, it took on a chilling significance. Detectives tracked down Curtis to a rural property just outside town limits. It was tucked deep behind trees. The kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. He lived alone, his land scattered with old furniture, rusted tools, and a trailer parked near the back fence. When officers approached, he was tense but compliant. He said he hadn't seen Douglas in years, didn't even know he was being investigated. But there was something in his eyes, something guarded, like he knew more than he was letting on. They requested a search warrant. While waiting for approval, a few detectives kept eyes on the property from a distance. Late one night, they noticed a light flicker on in the trailer, then off again. The main house stayed dark. It was nothing unusual. On its own, but then, just before dawn, someone was seen slipping out of the trailer and disappearing into the woods behind the property. A search team was called in immediately. What they found in the trailer made everyone go silent. It wasn't just a run-down camper. Inside, the walls were lined with thin insulation, but covered in posters, children's characters, faded stickers, and old-school charts. In the corner, there was a mattress, small and sunken in the middle. Next to it sat a plastic storage bin filled with girls' clothing, most of it small-sized and outdated. And taped to one wall, carefully laminated, was a drawing of a red-haired girl holding a balloon. In shaky handwriting, the bottom corner read, "My name is M." They called the Parker family in privately, not wanting to confirm anything publicly yet. Emily's mom stood in the trailer and stared at the drawing for a long time. She didn't say anything at first. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "That's her handwriting. That's her." The trailer was treated as an active scene. Forensics teams swarmed in, carefully examining everything: dust patterns, hairs, prints, fibers. It wasn't just the space that disturbed them. It was the feeling that it had been used recently. A plate was still in the sink. A radio sat on a crate, its dials worn from use. One of the officers found a journal tucked beneath a mattress. It was mostly blank, but in the middle pages were a few simple sentences, written over and over. "I am safe here. I am not supposed to leave. I miss the girl in the window." The discovery changed everything. It was no longer a question of whether Emily had been kept alive. It was becoming clearer that she might still be. Somewhere Curtis Bloom was taken in for questioning again. This time, the tone was different. Detectives presented what they found. And for the first time, Curtis's nerves showed. His answers were shorter. He fumbled with dates. He asked for a lawyer. But just before the session ended, one detective leaned in and asked, "Was she here last week?" Curtis looked away. His hands were trembling. He didn't speak. The pressure now was unbearable. Teams were spread across nearby towns, searching abandoned buildings, empty lots, anywhere someone could hide. Helicopters were called in. Thermal drones scanned wooded areas. Tips flooded the police lines, some useful, others pure speculation. But the fear was now real. If Emily was still alive and someone realized the search was closing in, she could be moved or worse. Then, in a twist that took the investigation in a whole new direction, a call came in from a woman working at a roadside diner nearly 60 miles from the Parker home. She said a teenage girl had come in 2 nights earlier, asking if she could use the restroom. She seemed quiet, confused, and had no phone or ID. She didn't eat, just drank water and left. But what struck the woman was her hair bright red, cut short, and her shirt. It had a faded cartoon logo that matched one of the shirts found in the Crawlspace weeks earlier. Officers were dispatched to the area immediately. They questioned nearby gas stations, checked bus stations, showed around old-school photos of Emily. One cashier remembered seeing the girl too. "She looked like she was waiting for someone," he said. kept looking over her shoulder. Security footage showed a girl matching the description, walking past the station alone. Her face was partially hidden by a hoodie, but her hair peeked out from underneath. Back at the command center, the room fell silent as the grainy footage played. Emily's mother watched it over and over, studying every movement. "That's her walk," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "That's my daughter." The footage ended with the girl disappearing into the night. What happened next would take everything that investigators thought they knew and flip it upside down. Because just as they began to close in on a new location, an old, crumbling motel on the edge of town, something else surfaced. An anonymous letter left on the doorstep of the police station. No envelope, no fingerprints. Just 6 words written in shaky black ink. "She remembers more than you think." Everyone froze. The detectives, the analysts, even the most seasoned. Officers felt a chill. Was it a warning, a threat, or a message from Emily herself? The tension had never been higher. The town was watching. The family was waiting. And somewhere out there, a girl who vanished without a trace 8 years ago might finally be about to step back into the light. But nothing could prepare them for what they would find next. The anonymous letter changed everything. Investigators had been chasing traces, following scattered clues, and clinging to fragile hope. But this note felt personal, deliberate, like someone out there knew far more than they were letting on. The handwriting was rushed, the ink slightly smudged as if the writer had hesitated. "She remembers more than you think." That one sentence stirred new theories. If Emily had escaped or been let go, was watching her now. And what exactly did she remember? Detectives scrambled to cross-reference past tipsters' old acquaintances, and anyone who had reached out recently with suspicious insight. But the letter bore no return address, and security footage from outside the police station showed only a hooded figure moving quickly through the shadows. No face, no vehicle, nothing to go on. Still, something about the timing felt calculated. Just as they were closing in on the motel where the girl may have been hiding, this message arrived. Was it trying to help or send them in the wrong direction? They couldn't afford to wait. A team was dispatched to the rundown motel mentioned in the earlier lead. It had a faded sign, peeling paint, and only a few working lights along the hallway. Most of the rooms were empty. A few were occupied by long-term tenants, people with nowhere else to go. Quietly, officers knocked on doors, flashing photos of Emily, asking if anyone had seen her. One tenant, an older man with a slow gait and watery eyes, hesitated before answering. "Room 8, he said. "Saw a girl go in there last night. She didn't look right. Scared?" They approached room 8 cautiously. No response. The door was locked. With permission from the manager, they entered. The room was dark, the curtains drawn. On the bed sat a plastic bag from a nearby gas station, water bottles, crackers, a toothbrush. And on the table beside it was something unmistakable. A school notebook with a faded sticker on the front, Hello Kitty. Inside were only a few pages of writing, mostly short phrases. "My name is Emily. I don't know who to trust. Someone is watching me again." But she was gone. Just like that. Clothes gone. Bag gone. No sign of struggle, only the sound of the heater clicking. In the silence, outside, as the officers spread out across the parking lot and surrounding streets, another call came in. A woman from the next town over had found something strange on her doorstep that morning, a backpack. Worn, dirty, but zipped neatly. Inside were clothes, a water bottle, a wrapped sandwich, and a small voice recorder. She hadn't touched it. She was too afraid. She'd seen the news and thought maybe it was connected. Investigators took the recorder and had it analyzed immediately. When they pressed play, the tape crackled softly before a young voice came through. Quiet, unsteady. "If anyone's hearing this, my name is Emily Parker. I think that's still my name. I don't know who I am to the people looking for me, but I think I used to be that girl. I was taken. I was told no one was looking. I was told my family was gone." She paused. Deep breath. Then continued. "I don't know who to trust. He's still out there. He told me not to speak. That if I remembered too much, I'd disappear forever." The message ended there. Just static. The officers played it over and over. There was no mistaking her voice. It was older, but filled with fear. Emily was alive. She was moving. And she knew someone was hunting her. But who was he? Everyone had assumed Douglas Haynes was the main suspect, but now there were more questions than answers. Had someone else been controlling things all along? Had Douglas been a piece of something larger? That's when the second twist surfaced, something no one saw coming. One of the forensic techs reviewing old audio from the Crawlspace found a nearly erased file on a broken cassette player recovered weeks earlier. With digital enhancement, a faint voice became clear. It wasn't Emily. It was a man, speaking low and slow, almost rehearsed. "They'll come looking. Not now, maybe not next year, but one day. If she slips, if she says too much, end it. Don't ask. Just end it." It sounded like an instruction, a command. And it wasn't Douglas's voice. The team scrambled to run voice analysis through old case interviews. Past suspects, even town officials who had been involved at the time of Emily's disappearance. And that's when the match hit. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a name no one had heard before. It was someone who had once led the initial investigation, a retired officer named Warren Tate. Warren had left the force quietly 5 years earlier. Citing health issues, he moved out of town, bought property in a remote area, and kept mostly to himself. But his name had always been in the early reports. He was the first on scene when Emily was reported missing. He'd organized the early searches, and he was one of the officers who had signed off on not searching beneath the Parker home in detail, citing no signs of forced entry or struggle. Suddenly, every decision he had made during that first investigation came into question. Investigators pulled up his old files, maps of the area, logs of who had access to crime scene evidence. They even traced back chain of custody forms for the original search documents. In 2 separate cases, files had been altered, entries removed, timestamps changed. They couldn't prove it yet, but the signs were pointing toward a darker truth. The person who had been in charge of finding Emily might have been involved in hiding her from the very beginning. The mood in the investigation unit shifted. What they were dealing with wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It was a cover-up, a deliberate, calculated one. And if Emily remembered more than they thought, then she wasn't just running from fear. She was running from someone who once wore a badge. Someone who still had something to lose. The stakes were no longer just about finding Emily. They were about stopping someone who had fooled everyone for years. Someone who knew how to stay just one step ahead. And as the story spiraled deeper into the unknown, the town held its breath once again. Because now the search wasn't just for a missing girl. It was for the truth that someone had buried right alongside her. The final breakthrough came late one night when a tip from an old friend of Warren Tate's finally cracked the case open. The man claimed Warren had once mentioned owning a second piece of land undeclared, off the records, and completely isolated. It wasn't much, just a broken-down shack in the woods near the old quarry. A place most locals didn't even know existed anymore. Officers wasted no time. A team was dispatched at dawn, weaving their way through thick forest, miles from any paved road. They moved in quietly, uncertain of what or who they might find. From a distance, the shack looked abandoned. Its roof was sagging, the windows boarded up. But as they got closer, the signs were there. Fresh footprints in the mud, smoke faintly trailing from a rusty chimney pipe. The front door was locked, but not tightly. They pushed inside slowly. The air was thick and stale. The single-room cabin was mostly empty, just a cot, a propane heater, and a few scattered blankets. But in the back corner, hidden behind a shelf, they found another door. This one led to a storm cellar, buried beneath layers of old boards and camouflage netting. When they opened it, they heard the sound they had waited years to hear. A voice, soft, scared, but unmistakably human. Emily, she was curled in a corner, wrapped in a sleeping bag, her eyes wide with disbelief. It took her a few seconds to understand she wasn't in danger. One of the officers gently said her name, and her shoulders started to shake. She cried, not loudly, but like someone who hadn't let herself feel anything in a very long time. She had been hiding, waiting, surviving. And now, finally, it was over. But what she told them next changed everything. She hadn't been locked in, not this time. She had come here on her own, knowing it was the last place anyone would look. Because she had remembered something. She had buried deep down for years. Not just that Warren Tate had been part of it, but that someone else had been helping him the whole time. Her mother's best friend. The woman who had stood by the family all these years. Who had helped run search parties. Held Emily's mom's hand when things felt hopeless. She had been there since day one, offering support and sympathy, but all while hiding a secret. Emily remembered her voice first. She remembered the woman. Visiting the house before she disappeared, watching her closely, telling her not to talk to strangers. She remembered being taken in a van, hearing her whisper instructions. At first, Emily thought it was just a nightmare. But when she finally escaped the last place she'd been kept, and started piecing it all together, the voice came back clear as day. The officers moved fast. They brought in the woman under quiet questioning, not tipping off the media. She denied everything. Said Emily was confused, traumatized, making things up. But the evidence was mounting. Letters Emily had kept, things only the woman would have known. A bracelet she had given Emily as a birthday gift years before, now found in one of the shelters she'd been hiding in. The pressure broke her. She confessed, not in one grand speech, but in fragments. Said she hadn't meant for it to go so far. Claimed Warren had manipulated her, convinced her Emily's family was in danger, that taking her was a way to protect her. But that wasn't true. The truth was darker. They had planned to keep Emily hidden for reasons still unclear, twisted, justifications that no one fully understood. It didn't matter now. The mask had fallen. Emily was finally safe. Her return home was quiet. Her family didn't rush to the cameras or host any press conference. They just held her, cried, and sat together in silence for hours. Jake, now older, hugged her like he never wanted to let go. Her mom didn't ask questions right away. She just stroked Emily's hair and whispered, "You're home. That's all that matters." But the story didn't quite end there. Weeks later, as Emily slowly began adjusting to life outside the shadows, she gave one final interview with investigators. She shared what she could, details about the years she lost, the places she was taken, and the people who lied to her. But at the very end, she said something no one expected. There was another girl. The room went still. She explained that when she was younger, maybe 11 or 12, she remembered sharing one of the hiding places with another child. Red hair, freckles, but younger. She thought they were sisters for a while, but then one day, the girl was gone. Emily never saw her again. The investigators were stunned. No such report existed. No other child was known to be missing from that area at that time. And yet, Emily was certain. She remembered her laugh, her name just a first name, Sophie. And just like that, the case that had seemed over opened a new door. Because now, the question wasn't just how Emily had survived, but who else had been taken before her, and who might still be out there. In the days following Emily's return, the town seemed to shift. For so long, her story had been a wound left open, a mystery everyone lived with quietly, unsure if it would ever be solved. Now, the truth had come out, not all of it, but enough to understand what really happened. The man once trusted to lead the investigation, Warren Tate, was arrested and charged with obstruction of justice, child endangerment, and conspiracy. The woman who had stood beside Emily's family for years, hiding behind sympathy, was also in custody. She refused to explain her motives, but the evidence spoke louder than anything she could have said. Emily stayed mostly out of the public. She needed time, space, and peace. Her family moved back into their home for a while, carefully fixing it up and making it feel warm again. Her old bedroom had changed over the years, but her mother kept a few of her favorite childhood items in storage. When Emily saw them again, she didn't cry, she just stared at them, as if reconnecting with a version of herself she had long forgotten. The pink backpack, the Hello Kitty drawings, the books she used to read at night, these pieces of her past had been waiting quietly. Just like her family had, her brother Jake was her constant. He didn't push her to talk, didn't ask her for details. He just sat with her. They listened to music, played board games, and went on quiet walks through the neighborhood. Every now and then, Emily would stop and look around, recognizing the places she had walked through as a child, the corner where she used to race her bike, the swing set near the school. Slowly, the fog in her memory began to lift. The most difficult part, though, was trying to understand the missing years. Investigators worked with her gently, piecing together timelines and locations. She remembered bits and pieces: a cabin with yellow curtains, a basement with no windows, a place near a river where birds chirped every morning. Each memory helped build a map, and as they connected dots, they found several properties linked to Warren and the woman who had helped him. No one had noticed before because the names on the deeds had been falsified, listed under shell companies or distant relatives. It was all part of a plan one carefully made to avoid detection. And yet, what had held everything together wasn't money or power. It was silence. Fear. The belief that no one would look beneath the surface. But Emily proved that even after all those years, the truth could still rise to the top. The mystery of Sophie the girl, Emily remembered, became the next focus. Detectives cross-checked missing persons databases and re-examined old files that had gone ignored for too long. Eventually, they found a case from nearly 12 years ago. A girl named Sophie Langdon had disappeared while on a camping trip with her father, who claimed she had wandered off during the night. He was questioned at the time, but no charges were filed. He later moved out of state and died in a car accident 2 years after the disappearance. The connection was loose, but one photo in Sophie's file made Emily stop cold. It was her. The red hair, the freckles, the same smile she remembered, though Sophie was never found. Emily's account gave new direction to that case. It brought closure to a family that had spent more than a decade searching for answers. Sophie's mother later wrote a letter to Emily, not asking for details, just thanking her for remembering. She said that knowing her daughter hadn't been forgotten, even in the darkest places, brought her a kind of peace she never thought possible. As time passed, Emily began writing. Quietly at first, just in notebooks. Then, with help, she started working on a memoir, not to relive the trauma, but to reclaim her voice. She wanted to tell the story in her own words, to help others understand what it means to survive something like that, and how healing isn't linear. Some days were good, some were hard. But she kept moving forward. Local schools and community centers began inviting specialists to talk about child safety and missing persons awareness. For the first time in years, conversations were happening openly, no longer whispered behind closed doors. People understood now that silence helps no one, and that sometimes evil hides in plain sight. Emily's story had changed more than her family's life hit had woken up an entire town. Her mother, once shattered by grief, found strength again in advocacy. She worked with other families who had lost children, helping them navigate the chaos of unanswered questions. Her father, a quiet man by nature, returned to his work, but made sure to be home every night for dinner. Their family, though scarred, was whole again. Not perfect, not like before, but real, grounded in the kind of love that survives even the darkest storms. Jake, now in his final year of school, talked about studying criminal justice. He wanted to help others like his sister. He said he knew what it felt like to be left with no answers, and he wanted to be the kind of investigator who never gave up. Emily smiled when he told her. "You already are," she said. The media eventually moved on, as they always do. But the people closest to the story never forgot. The house where Emily was first taken remained vacant for a while, then was quietly demolished. In its place, the town planned a small park, with a bench dedicated to the children still missing, and those who made it home. Emily's final words in her memoir were simple but powerful. "I was lost, but I never stopped hoping someone would find me." If you're reading this and you feel invisible, please know someone is looking, and your story isn't over yet. Her words stayed with people. They reminded everyone that even when things feel broken beyond repair, there is still room for healing, still room for hope. The story of Emily Parker had started with heartbreak, with confusion, with fear. But it ended with truth, with light breaking through, and most of all, with a girl who vanished walking to school, finally finding her way back home.